They shoved me aside like I was invisible, right there in the middle of the park where all the neighbors could see. "Move faster, Slowpoke. You're embarrassing us," my daughter-in-law snapped, dragging my arm hard enough to make me wince. I could feel the stares, curious, pitying, some with judgment. My legs trembled, not from age alone, but from the sharp sting of humiliation cutting deeper than any cane ever could. I'm Edith. 78 years old, and I never imagined my own family could treat me like a nuisance. Just last week, I was bending over the garden, proud of my tulips and roses. Today, I was nothing more than a slow burden, a mistake they regretted having. My son, Daniel, said nothing. He stood beside his wife, Anna, pretending not to see the cruel words. His silence was worse than any insult. I wanted to scream, to remind them both that I raised Daniel, that I was the one who sacrificed for them, but the words caught in my throat. As Anna pulled me along, I noticed the little park bench where the old ladies usually sat, sharing stories and laughter. I longed to join them, to find someone who still saw me as Edith, not just a slow old woman. But Anna made sure no one would welcome me. That night, in the quiet of my small, dimly lit room, I felt something ignite inside me. This humiliation, this unbearable shame, would not be the end of my story. No, it was the cruel spark that would light a fire far stronger than their cruelty. I grabbed my phone and replayed Anna's words in my mind. "Move faster, Slowpoke," I whispered back to myself. They thought I was powerless, invisible. But I was about to prove them wrong. I started recording the next day. Not just the park incident, but every little cruel act, every harsh word hidden behind closed doors. I found the strength to face my fear because I knew that if I didn't fight, I would disappear quietly, just like Anna wanted. And so, I decided to do more than survive. I would make sure everyone in our neighborhood, and beyond, knew the truth about what was really happening behind their perfect smiles. Before I go further, I want to ask you, where are you from? Because I know many of you out there might be feeling the same pain, the same loneliness. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Together, we'll shine light on stories too many want to hide. The next morning, the air was thick with tension as I silently watched Anna prepare for the day. She was meticulous about her appearance, as if every sharp glance or bitter word she tossed at me was a dagger she'd practiced wielding. I sat quietly in my worn armchair, my hands trembling, not from weakness, but from a fire building inside. I wasn't sure when the cracks in this family had started. I'd always been the one keeping the house warm, Daniel's rock through his troubles. But somewhere along the way, I became inconvenient, an obstacle in their perfect life. Anna left for the grocery store, telling me curtly not to slow her down if I came along. Of course, I had no intention of following at her pace. I had a plan, and patience was my secret weapon. I waited a few minutes, then quietly slipped out with my phone tucked inside my coat. At the park, I found the usual crowd, elderly neighbors chatting on the benches, parents pushing strollers, children laughing and running. I pulled out my phone and started recording as I walked slowly but deliberately. My cane tapped the pavement rhythmically, a steady heartbeat beneath the chaos of my mind. I spotted Anna again, arguing with a shopkeeper over a small mistake. She snapped, loud enough for many to hear, "I'm the only one who does anything around here. Don't waste my time." The people nearby glanced over, some with shock, others with a silent, "I told you so" expression. I caught every word. When Anna noticed me filming, her eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. Perhaps she thought I was harmless. I knew better. Over the next few days, I secretly gathered more evidence, recordings of Anna mocking me at home, her cruel comments, and worst of all, Daniel's icy indifference. The silence from my own son felt like a betrayal deeper than any insult. But I had to be patient. Revenge wouldn't come from rash acts but from slow, steady exposure. I contacted social services anonymously, sending them the videos. I reached out to neighbors quietly, telling them bits and pieces, enough to make them watch Anna carefully. At night, I would lie awake, wondering if I was doing the right thing. Was it worth risking more humiliation? But the thought of disappearing without a fight was unbearable. The turning point came when the social worker arrived unexpectedly. Anna's mask cracked that day, her rehearsed smile faltered, and Daniel's silence turned into uneasy stammering. They knew the walls they built around their cruelty were finally crumbling. I felt no joy in their pain. What I wanted was justice, dignity restored. And in that moment, I knew I was no longer the slowpoke they laughed at. I was a force they could no longer ignore. The day the social worker came, the air in our home shifted like a storm about to break. I was sitting quietly in the living room, pretending to read, but my heart was pounding fiercely. I heard the front door open and close, and then soft footsteps coming toward me. Daniel stood in the doorway, his face pale and tight. Behind him, the social worker followed, a kind woman with gentle eyes but an unmistakable professional firmness. Anna was in the kitchen, overhearing every word. She tried to keep her composure, but the slight tremor in her hands betrayed her. Daniel's usual stoic demeanor faltered as well, and I caught a flicker of guilt, or was it fear, in his eyes. The social worker introduced herself and said, "Mrs. Evans, we've received reports about possible neglect and emotional abuse. I'd like to speak with you privately." I nodded, gathering my strength as I followed her to the small sunroom at the back of the house. Sunlight streamed through the windows, but it couldn't warm the cold dread I felt inside. Still, this was my chance, my moment to finally speak the truth. I told her everything. How Anna mocked me, pushed me aside, starved me of kindness and respect. How Daniel turned a blind eye, letting the woman he loved treat his mother like a ghost. I told her about the times I was locked out in the cold, the cruel words said in public, and the loneliness that felt like a heavy chain around my heart. The social worker listened carefully, taking notes. Then she asked to see any proof I had. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone and showed her the videos, the harsh words, the cold neglect, the moments no one else had seen. After watching, she nodded gravely and promised to act. I felt a surge of hope mixed with fear. What would happen next? Would Daniel and Anna fight back? Would they pretend nothing was wrong? Over the following days, I noticed changes. Anna was colder than ever, barely speaking to me except to bark orders or toss insults. Daniel avoided my gaze, his silence deeper than before. But I knew the social worker's visits and the growing awareness in the neighborhood were turning the tide. I also began quietly talking to neighbors, sharing bits of my story, careful not to reveal everything too soon. Many were sympathetic but afraid to get involved. Some admitted they'd seen Anna's cruelty but had dismissed it as family matters. One evening, I met Mrs. Collins, an elderly widow who had lost her husband recently. She took my hand and said, "Edith, it's time someone stood up to them. You're braver than you think." Her words stuck with me. I realized I wasn't alone, and this wasn't just my battle. It was a fight for all the quiet victims suffering behind closed doors. But Anna wasn't going to give up without a fight. One afternoon, she confronted me in the hallway, voice low but venomous. "You think you're clever, don't you? Filming me, turning everyone against me. But Daniel and I will make sure you regret this." I stared back, steady despite the pounding in my chest. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." She sneered and walked away, but I felt a strange power inside me. The humiliation that once crushed me was turning into fuel to fight, to reclaim my dignity. Then came the biggest surprise. Daniel, who had been silent and distant, pulled me aside one evening. His eyes were tired, filled with conflict. "Mom," he said quietly, "I didn't want you to suffer like this. I should have done more." For the first time in months, I saw a flicker of the son I once knew. It wasn't a full apology, but it was a start. Still, the road ahead was long. The social worker's reports led to meetings, investigations, and tense family confrontations. I wasn't just fighting Anna anymore, I was fighting years of silence and denial. But with each day, I grew stronger. I began organizing small meetings with other elderly neighbors, sharing stories, building a support network. We talked about abuse, loneliness, and the strength to fight back. My home became a sanctuary for those who had no voice. And then came the unexpected. One afternoon, as I was walking home from the park, a group of neighbors stopped me. They had seen the videos and heard the stories. "Edith," one of them said, "you're a hero to us all. We want to help." It was overwhelming. The quiet woman they thought was a burden was now a beacon of courage. But Anna's shadow loomed large. She began spreading rumors, trying to turn the neighborhood against me. "She's lying," she whispered. "She just wants attention." At first, some neighbors wavered. The weight of scandal scared them. But the truth was stronger. More videos surfaced, and people's hearts began to open. I learned that sometimes, revenge isn't just punishment, it's shining a light so bright that darkness can't hide. As I prepare to tell you what happened next, I want to remind you, if you're suffering in silence, know that you're not alone. There's strength in speaking out, and power in standing tall. Before we continue, please like, share, and subscribe. And I'd love to know, where are you from? Your story matters, and together, we can fight the silence. The air in the neighborhood had shifted, but not entirely in my favor. Anna's whispered accusations and carefully spun lies began to reach ears I hadn't yet touched. "She's making it all up," I heard a woman say one afternoon at the grocery store. "Probably just wants attention." I clenched my jaw but didn't respond. The scars of doubt hurt as much as any insult, but I knew that exposing cruelty wasn't a straight path. There would be backlash, fear, and silence on some sides before truth could shine. So, I doubled down. With the few neighbors who stood with me, I started a community awareness campaign about elder abuse. We organized meetings, shared stories, and slowly, the invisible wounds we all carried began to surface. Mrs. Collins was my steadfast ally. "It's not just about us," she said at one meeting, voice trembling with years of sorrow and strength. "It's about everyone who's been silenced." Anna's anger became palpable. One evening, I came home to find the garden gate vandalized, my flowers trampled underfoot. A note lay on the porch, crudely written, "Stay out of things you don't understand." Fear flickered briefly in my chest, but it was quickly replaced by resolve. This was no longer just personal, it was a battle for respect, for dignity, for every elderly person ignored and abused. Daniel remained a complicated figure. He oscillated between guilt and denial. One night, over cold tea, he confessed, "I wanted to protect my family. I thought ignoring it would make things easier." "But it didn't," I said quietly. "You can't protect family by closing your eyes." He nodded, and I saw a man trapped by his own choices. The social services investigation grew serious. Anna was warned officially, and a case file was opened. The neighborhood watched closely now, some with sympathy, others with judgment. One afternoon, Anna confronted me in the grocery store parking lot, her eyes blazing. "You think this makes you a hero? You're just an old woman causing trouble." I met her glare without flinching. "I'm the one who will be remembered. You'll be forgotten." Weeks later, the community center hosted a public forum about elder care and abuse. I spoke, my voice shaking but fierce. I told my story, not just about Anna, but about the many invisible sufferings endured in silence. People listened. Tears were shed. And the tide began to turn. Anna's lies unraveled as more neighbors came forward with their own stories of her cruelty. The support I once feared losing grew stronger. One evening, Daniel joined me at a meeting. "I want to help," he said simply. I looked at him, surprised. "It's not too late." Together, we worked toward healing, not just for me, but for the family and community fractured by years of silence. I realized then that revenge wasn't just punishment, it was reclaiming the truth and building a future where no one would suffer alone. The night after the community forum, I lay awake, the house unusually silent. The weight of what I had shared pressed heavily on my chest, but beneath it was a growing sense of hope, a fragile, flickering ember in the darkness. I had spoken not just for myself, but for every elder who had felt invisible, unheard, and disrespected. And for the first time in a long time, I believed that maybe, just maybe, change was possible. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Neighbors I barely knew began stopping me in the street, offering quiet words of support or sharing their own stories. I was no longer just Edith, the slowpoke, or the burden. I was a symbol of resilience, a voice breaking the silence that had kept so many suffering in isolation. Daniel, surprisingly, stepped up. He showed up at meetings, helped organize events, and even confronted Anna on more than one occasion. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the guilt of past neglect mingled with the desire to make amends. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Still, Anna's resistance was fierce. One afternoon, I found a stack of threatening letters slipped under my door, each one more vicious than the last. They called me names, warned me to stop stirring trouble, and threatened worse if I continued. Fear tried to creep in, but I refused to let it control me. I reminded myself that silence was the true enemy, not just for me, but for all the others who had suffered in the shadows. I reported the threats to the police, who promised to keep an eye on the situation. The community rallied around me more fiercely after that. Friends came to visit regularly, and neighbors began volunteering to check in on me. One particularly dark evening, when the rain was pouring and the wind howled like a warning, the power went out. I sat in the dim light of a candle, my thoughts drifting to the years of quiet suffering I had endured. I wondered how many others were trapped in homes filled with cruelty and loneliness, too afraid to speak out. The next morning, news spread that Anna had been called into a formal hearing by social services. Evidence had piled up, thanks to my recordings, neighbor testimonies, and the investigation. For the first time, the system was taking real action. When Daniel told me the news, relief and sadness mingled in his voice. "I'm sorry it had to come to this, Mom." I nodded, feeling the weight of years of neglect, but also a sense of justice finally unfolding. Despite the turmoil, I remained focused on the community campaign. We held workshops teaching elders their rights, providing resources, and creating a support network. The once silent neighborhood began to hum with conversation and care. One afternoon, I walked through the park, cane tapping firmly on the pavement. Children played nearby, their laughter a bright contrast to the darkness that had lingered for so long. I spotted a few familiar faces, neighbors who had once avoided me now greeting me with smiles and nods. As I sat on a bench, an older man approached. He introduced himself as Mr. Harper, a retired counselor who had been listening to my story. "You've inspired more people than you know," he said kindly. "We need more voices like yours." I felt a lump rise in my throat. To think that after all the pain, I had sparked something good was more than I had dared hope. But the battle was not yet over. Anna, desperate and cornered, began spreading rumors about me, accusing me of exaggeration and manipulation. Some neighbors wavered, unsure whom to believe. That's when I knew my next step had to be clear and bold. I invited the entire neighborhood to a public gathering in the community hall. I planned to share everything openly, the abuse, the threats, and the fight for justice. No more whispers or secrets. It was time for the truth to stand in the light. The night of the gathering arrived, filled with nervous anticipation. Chairs were arranged in neat rows, a microphone set up at the front. As I stood before the crowd, faces both familiar and new stared back at me. I spoke from the heart, recounting my journey, the humiliation, the pain, and the growing strength that carried me through. I shared the recordings and letters, the support from neighbors, and the hope for a safer, kinder community. There were tears, gasps, and moments of silence heavy with realization. The room was charged with emotion. When I finished, a wave of applause filled the hall. People came forward to thank me, share their own stories, and pledge their support. Anna was absent, her absence a silent admission. Daniel sat beside me, a quiet but steadfast presence. In that moment, I understood the power of speaking out, not just for revenge, but for healing. The journey ahead would still have challenges, but I was no longer alone or invisible. Together, we were turning humiliation into strength, and pain into progress. The day after the community gathering felt surreal. The warmth of the applause still echoed in my ears, but as I went about my daily routine, the reality of what lay ahead began to settle in like a slow, heavy fog. The fight wasn't over. If anything, it had just begun. Neighbors who had been silent or distant started to approach me more openly now, some with cautious smiles, others with hesitant questions. I saw in their eyes the same mixture of fear and hope I had felt when I first began speaking out. The silence was breaking, but old habits die hard. Anna's absence from the meeting did not go unnoticed. Rumors swirled around her, and whispers of what the future might hold. I heard through the grapevine that she was consulting with lawyers, plotting her next move. She was desperate and dangerous. Daniel, too, was changed. No longer the silent bystander, he had begun to confront his wife's behavior. One afternoon, as we sat in the garden, he told me, "I can't undo what's been done, but I want to make things right. For you, and for all of us." His words were a balm to wounds I thought would never heal. Forgiveness wouldn't come easily, but the first step was there. But as the days passed, the tension in the house grew thicker. Anna's venom didn't lessen, it merely changed form. She began to manipulate Daniel, sowing doubt and guilt, trying to isolate me once again. One evening, I overheard their hushed argument. Anna's voice was sharp. "She's ruining everything. If we don't stop her, you'll lose your family." Daniel's reply was quiet but firm. "I won't lose her again." Despite their conflict, the fractures in their relationship gave me a fragile hope. Meanwhile, the social services investigation continued. Officials visited frequently, checking in on my well-being and reviewing the evidence. The pressure on Anna mounted. I also began receiving invitations to speak at local gatherings and support groups. My story was resonating beyond my neighborhood, and with it came responsibility, and a sense of purpose. Yet, not all days were victories. I still faced moments of crushing loneliness, times when the weight of betrayal threatened to overwhelm me. But each time, I reminded myself of the women I'd met, the stories I'd heard, and the community we were building together. One afternoon, as I walked through the park, the same place where humiliation had first struck, I paused on a bench and watched children playing. Their laughter was a reminder of life's resilience. A young mother approached and smiled warmly. "Thank you," she said simply. "Your courage has helped me see that I'm not alone." Tears welled in my eyes. This was why I fought, not just for myself, but for every silent soul waiting for their voice. The path ahead was uncertain. Anna's shadow lingered, and the scars of the past were deep. But for the first time, I felt strong enough to face whatever came next. I knew I was no longer just a slowpoke or a burden. I was Edith, a survivor, a fighter, and a beacon for those still trapped in darkness. The days following the community gathering unfolded like a delicate dance between hope and tension, each step measured but full of uncertainty. I awoke each morning to a mixture of anticipation and dread, knowing the battle was far from over but that every word I had spoken had begun to crack the fortress of silence surrounding my life. Anna's absence from the public eye only made her presence loom larger in the shadows. I was certain she was scheming, spinning lies, and digging deeper to find ways to undermine me. The neighborhood buzzed with whispered conversations, some in support, others filled with doubt. It was the doubt that stung most. There were those who refused to believe an elderly woman could or would fight back, who clung to the idea that family matters should remain behind closed doors. Daniel's transformation was one of the few bright spots in this dark chapter. He had stopped avoiding me and started to reach out. He attended the meetings, sometimes offering quiet support, other times helping organize the campaign to raise awareness about elder abuse. But our conversations were still laced with the pain of years lost, trust broken, and wounds barely beginning to heal. One afternoon, Daniel and I sat in the garden, the air thick with unspoken words. He looked at me, his eyes filled with regret. "Mom, I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I should have protected you. I want to fix this, to make things right." I reached for his hand, feeling the weight of those words. Forgiveness wouldn't come easily, but this was a start. Yet, as Daniel softened, Anna's bitterness grew. I could sense her fury simmering beneath her carefully controlled facade. One evening, I overheard a heated exchange between them in the kitchen, their voices hushed but charged with tension. "You're ruining everything," Anna hissed. "If she wins, you'll lose everything, your family, your reputation." Daniel's voice was quiet but resolute. "I won't lose her again." Their fracturing relationship gave me a glimmer of hope. Perhaps Anna's hold on Daniel was weakening. Meanwhile, social services stepped up their involvement. Frequent visits from officials, interviews with neighbors, and reviews of the evidence put increasing pressure on Anna. Her veneer of control began to crack, revealing the cracks beneath the surface. Despite the progress, some days were harder than others. I battled loneliness and the memories of years spent in silence. The scars ran deep, and the path to healing was steep. But every call from a neighbor sharing their own story, every small victory in the campaign, reminded me why I had to keep going. One crisp autumn afternoon, I returned to the park, the very place where Anna had publicly humiliated me. I sat on the familiar bench, watching children chase each other in the golden light, their laughter a balm to my weary soul. A young mother approached, a gentle smile on her face. "Mrs. Evans, I want to thank you," she said softly. "Your courage has shown me I'm not alone. My mother suffers in silence, and your story gave me the strength to speak out." Tears welled in my eyes as I clasped her hands. This was the reason for everything, the reason I refused to let fear or shame silence me. But Anna was not finished. One evening, a threatening letter arrived, slipped under my door with crude handwriting warning me to stop the campaign or face consequences. Fear flickered in my heart, but it was quickly replaced by determination. Silence was the true enemy, and I refused to be silenced. I reported the threat to the police, who promised to keep watch. The community support grew stronger in response, neighbors volunteering to check in on me, offering companionship and protection. My voice began to reach further than I'd imagined. Invitations came to speak at other towns, to join support groups, to be a symbol for those trapped in similar situations. The weight of responsibility was heavy, but I welcomed it. I was no longer a victim but a leader, a beacon of hope. Yet, the fight wasn't over. Anna continued to spread lies, attempting to sway neighbors and friends. Some wavered, unsure whom to trust. The battle for truth and justice was ongoing. At one point, I gathered the courage to confront her directly. It was a cold morning when I saw her at the market, her eyes narrowing as they met mine. "You think you've won?" she sneered. "This isn't over." I held her gaze firmly. "It is over, for me. For you, it's just the beginning of consequences you refuse to face." Daniel, who had arrived silently beside me, added, "It's time to stop the lies and start facing reality." Together, we walked away, leaving her to stew in her own bitterness. The path to healing was long and winding, but I had taken the first steps. The community was waking up, neighbors were listening, and the silence was breaking. I wasn't just Edith anymore. I was a survivor, a fighter, a voice for the voiceless. And I would not stop until every shadow of abuse was brought into the light. The cold wind bit at my cheeks as I stood by the window, watching the leaves spiral and settle on the pavement outside. Autumn was slipping quickly into winter, and with the shortening days came a strange mix of hope and exhaustion that I could neither shake nor fully embrace. The fight I'd started felt like it was demanding more from me than I thought I could give, yet somehow, I kept moving forward, step by slow step. Since the community meeting, my life had become a series of battles and small victories, each punctuated by moments of loneliness and doubt. Anna's attempts to discredit me had grown more brazen, her whispers spreading like wildfire through the neighborhood. I heard murmurs that some families were withdrawing from the campaign, worried about stirring conflict or tarnishing reputations. The fear of social backlash was a powerful silencer. But then there were others, the quiet supporters who reached out in small, meaningful ways. Mrs. Collins brought me homemade soup nearly every day. Young families stopped me at the grocery store to share their gratitude. And Daniel, who seemed to be trying harder than ever to repair what had been broken, made an effort to include me in family moments again. Though fragile, it was a thread I clung to. One evening, as I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with an unexpected message. It was from a woman I'd never met, Sarah, a volunteer at a local elder advocacy group in a neighboring town. She wrote that my story had inspired many there, and they wanted to join forces, share resources, and create a regional campaign. The message sparked a renewed fire in me. The fight was no longer mine alone. It was growing, spreading beyond the borders of my little world. The very next day, I met with Sarah and her team at a small community center. We shared stories, strategies, and hopes. For the first time, I felt part of something bigger, an unstoppable force pushing back against the darkness that had once seemed all-consuming. But as the movement grew, so did the risks. Weeks later, a package arrived at my doorstep with no return address. Inside was a photo album, crudely marked with a threatening note. The pictures were from private family gatherings, moments stolen without my knowledge, intended to intimidate, to remind me that Anna's reach extended beyond public view. The fear I felt was real, but so was my resolve. I showed the package to the police and shared it with the advocacy group. Together, we reinforced safety plans and support systems. Then came the legal news. The social services investigation had culminated in a formal hearing where Anna faced serious charges of neglect and emotional abuse. The community gathered outside the courthouse, some in support of me, others in disbelief. Inside, Daniel testified, his words honest and painful. For the first time, the truth was not just mine but laid bare for all to see. The verdict was a relief. Anna was ordered to undergo counseling, and her access to the home was restricted. It was not the end, but it was justice, a start. As I walked out of the courthouse, surrounded by supportive neighbors and friends, I felt a wave of gratitude and strength. I had taken back my dignity, my voice, and my life. That evening, Daniel came to visit. We sat by the fire, the warmth a stark contrast to the chill outside. "I'm sorry for all the years I stayed silent," he said quietly. I took his hand and smiled. "We're moving forward now. Together." Looking back at the park, the place where this journey began, I knew the SlowPoke they once mocked had become something else entirely. A survivor. A fighter. A beacon. And my story was far from over. The first snowfall of winter dusted the streets like a fragile promise, softening the sharp edges of the past months but not erasing them. The cold seemed to awaken something deeper in me, a quiet determination that refused to fade even as the days grew shorter and darker. I'd come too far to turn back now. Since the courthouse verdict, the neighborhood's mood shifted again, this time tinged with a mix of relief and wariness. Anna's name was now spoken with caution, her presence diminished but her influence not entirely gone. The legal boundaries placed on her seemed to offer a shield, but I knew that healing wasn't only about restrictions or judgments. It was about rebuilding trust, restoring dignity, and reclaiming the space she had tried to erase me from. Daniel's involvement became more consistent. He was learning to stand firmly against Anna's manipulation, often catching me by surprise with small acts of kindness. The fractured family was trying, painfully and imperfectly, to find its way back. One cold afternoon, I received a letter from a local news outlet. They wanted to interview me, to share my story on a broader platform, to inspire others who might be suffering in silence. The idea both terrified and excited me. Speaking out publicly would make my life even more exposed, but it could also amplify the message that no one should suffer alone. The day of the interview, I dressed carefully, choosing a warm sweater and my favorite scarf. As I sat in front of the camera, answering questions about my journey, my voice trembled at times, but my resolve never wavered. I told them about the humiliation, the betrayal, and the slow, steady fight for justice. I spoke for every elder whose pain had been hidden behind closed doors. When the segment aired, the response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from strangers thanking me for my courage. Some shared their own stories, others offered support and solidarity. The network of voices grew stronger, and for the first time, I felt part of a movement far greater than myself. But with visibility came new challenges. Anna's allies, those who had doubted me or remained silent, began to push back harder. Rumors spread again, attempts to discredit me resurfaced, and the strain of constant vigilance weighed heavily. One evening, as I returned from a speaking engagement, I found my mailbox stuffed with hateful letters, threatening calls, and anonymous messages. The fear I had fought so hard to keep at bay flickered dangerously. That night, as I sat by the window watching the snow fall silently, I realized that the fight was no longer just about me. It was about every person who had been silenced, dismissed, or abused. It was about breaking the cycle for future generations. Daniel sat beside me, his presence a steady comfort. "We'll get through this," he said softly. "Together." I nodded, feeling the warmth of family rekindled even amid the cold. The road ahead was still uncertain, filled with challenges and moments of doubt. But I was no longer the timid woman they had pushed aside. I was Edith, a survivor, a voice, a force. And I was ready for whatever came next. The winter settled into the town with a biting chill, but inside me, a new warmth was growing, a fierce flame born from the battles I had endured and the victories I'd claimed. The fight was far from over, but the momentum was undeniable, and for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. After the news segment aired, the community support reached new heights. Invitations came in to speak at schools, churches, and senior centers. I met people whose stories mirrored mine, and together we began to weave a tapestry of shared strength and resilience. It was humbling and powerful to realize that my small stand had become a beacon for others. But not everyone was ready to accept the change. Anna's supporters, few but vocal, made their presence known in subtle but menacing ways. Flyers appeared overnight, anonymously distributed, questioning my motives and casting doubt on the truth I had bared. The cold winds of rumor and fear still swept through the neighborhood. One particularly difficult day, I received a call from a young woman named Maria, a volunteer at one of the elder support groups I had helped establish. Her voice trembled as she told me about her grandmother, trapped in a similar situation of neglect and abuse. She asked for advice, for guidance on how to help without causing more harm. It was a reminder that my fight was no longer just about my story, it was about countless others waiting for someone to speak up. Daniel was by my side more than ever now. One evening, as we sat by the fire, he turned to me and said, "Mom, I'm proud of you. You've changed so much, not just for yourself, but for everyone." His words stirred a quiet joy inside me. The wounds were still raw, but the cracks in our family were healing. Yet, Anna's shadow lingered. Her attempts to undermine me became more desperate, culminating in a confrontation that shook me to my core. One rainy afternoon, as I was returning from a meeting, Anna blocked my path near the park. Her eyes were cold, her voice low and threatening. "You think you've won?" she spat. "You'll never be free of me." I looked her straight in the eyes, steady and unafraid. "I'm already free." The confrontation was brief, but the message was clear. The battle was far from over. That night, as I lay in bed, I reflected on how far I had come, from the woman pushed aside and humiliated in the park to a voice that could not be silenced. I thought about the strength it took to stand, to fight, and to forgive. The road ahead would be long and winding, but I was no longer afraid. I had reclaimed my dignity, my voice, and my life. And I was ready to face whatever came next. The confrontation with Anna left me unsettled, but it also steeled my resolve. She was desperate, yes, but I knew that fear often disguised itself as anger and aggression. For years, I had been the one afraid of her words, her actions, her power to isolate me. Now, I was the one standing firm, ready to face whatever came. In the days that followed, I found myself reflecting on the meaning of strength. It wasn't just about fighting back or exposing cruelty. It was about reclaiming who I was, a woman worthy of respect, love, and dignity. A woman who had survived, who had broken the silence. Daniel and I spent more time together, trying to mend the fractured pieces of our relationship. He was learning to listen, to understand the pain I had carried in silence. One afternoon, we sorted through old family albums, and I saw him smile genuinely at memories we had long neglected. It was a small but precious sign of healing. Meanwhile, my community campaign began to take shape into something bigger. We formed an official support group for elders, offering workshops on legal rights, self-advocacy, and emotional healing. The group grew quickly, women and men who had suffered quietly, now finding strength in each other's stories. One evening, after a particularly powerful meeting, Mrs. Collins pulled me aside. Her eyes sparkled with unshed tears. "Edith, you've done more than just fight for yourself. You've given us all hope." Her words warmed me more than any fire could. But not all battles were fought in meetings or courts. One chilly morning, I received a call from the police. A stranger had reported suspicious activity around my home. Someone had been lurking near the garden late at night. Fear crept back in, but this time I was prepared. The police increased their patrols, neighbors offered to check on me, and I installed security cameras around the house. I wasn't alone anymore. The recordings from the cameras showed a shadowy figure lurking near the back gate, an unmistakable warning that Anna's wrath had not diminished. Determined not to be intimidated, I shared the footage with the police and neighbors. The community rallied around me, their support unshakable. Amidst the tension, something unexpected happened. Daniel invited me to a family dinner, a simple gesture, but one filled with meaning. For the first time in years, I sat at the head of the table, not as a burden but as a respected matriarch. The dinner was far from perfect. Old wounds surfaced, and tensions occasionally flared. But beneath the surface was a fragile hope, a chance to rebuild what had been broken. As the night wore on, I looked around the room, the faces of my family, the neighbors who had become friends, and I realized how far I had come. From the slowpoke pushed aside in the park to the woman who had sparked a movement, I was no longer invisible. The journey was far from over. The scars of the past would always remain, but they no longer defined me. I was Edith, a survivor, a fighter, a voice for those who had none. And I was ready to keep fighting, no matter what came next. The family dinner was more than a meal, it was a fragile truce, a small beacon of hope after years of silence and neglect. Sitting at the head of the table, I felt a mix of pride and cautious optimism. For so long, I had been pushed aside, treated like a ghost in my own home, but tonight, I was present. Seen. Respected. Daniel had made an effort, inviting a few close neighbors and friends to join us, creating an atmosphere of warmth and community. The familiar clink of cutlery and soft murmur of conversation filled the room, but beneath it, I could feel the undercurrent of old tensions, waiting to resurface. Anna was there too, quieter than usual, her eyes flickering with something between resentment and calculation. She still held a grip on Daniel, but I could see the cracks forming, small but undeniable. As the meal progressed, I found myself reflecting on how far I had come. From the humiliating moment in the park, when Anna had called me a slowpoke and dragged me along like I was nothing, to now, where I was not only fighting for my dignity but helping others find their voices too. It had been a long and difficult journey, filled with pain, betrayal, and moments of despair, but also with unexpected kindness and resilience. After dinner, I invited everyone to stay for a brief meeting. The support group I had helped start was growing, and I wanted to share the progress we were making with my family. It was time they understood the wider impact of what I had endured, and what could happen if we faced these issues together. I spoke about the workshops, the growing community of elders finding strength in shared stories, and the ongoing campaign to raise awareness about elder abuse. I talked about the importance of speaking out and standing up, even when it feels impossible. Some faces in the room softened, others hardened. Anna's lips pressed into a thin line, but Daniel looked thoughtful, his eyes fixed on me with a new respect. The conversation shifted naturally to the future, how we could rebuild family ties and create a safer, kinder environment for everyone. It was tentative, like planting seeds in rocky soil, but it was a start. After the meeting, Daniel pulled me aside. "Mom, I want to help more. Not just with the family but with the campaign. You've inspired me." His words touched me deeply. The man who had once turned away was now standing beside me, ready to fight. But the peace was fragile. Anna's resentment simmered, and her attempts to undermine me became more subtle but no less damaging. She started spreading rumors that I was using the campaign for personal gain, trying to turn neighbors and friends against me. I felt the sting of betrayal again, but I refused to be dragged down. I reminded myself that truth and justice were on my side, and the growing support from the community was a shield against lies. One afternoon, as I was preparing for a public speaking event at a local senior center, I received a call that made my blood run cold. The police had found evidence of a break-in attempt at my home. Someone had tried to tamper with the locks, but thankfully, no one had gotten inside. Fear tried to claw its way in, but I fought it back. This was intimidation, a desperate move by someone who felt threatened by the changes I was bringing. I was no longer vulnerable, and I would not be silenced. The police increased patrols around my home, and the community organized a neighborhood watch. The outpouring of support was overwhelming, and I realized that the fight had become bigger than any one person. At the speaking event, I shared not just my story but the stories of others who had found courage through our support group. I spoke about the importance of community, of standing together against abuse and neglect. The room was filled with tears, nods, and quiet determination. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope could grow. Returning home that evening, Daniel met me at the door. His face was serious, but there was warmth in his eyes. "We'll get through this, Mom. Together." As I looked at him, I thought about the journey ahead, the challenges still to face, the healing yet to happen. But I also thought about the strength I had found, the community we had built, and the future we were fighting for. The woman who had once been pushed aside, humiliated, and silenced was now a leader, a survivor, and a voice for so many. And I was ready for whatever came next. Winter's grip tightened, frosting the edges of windows and turning the streets into shimmering ribbons of ice. Inside my home, the warmth of the fire and the company of friends and family offered a stark contrast to the chill outside. Yet beneath the surface, tension simmered, a reminder that healing was a journey filled with detours and unexpected challenges. Since the break-in attempt, my life had become a careful balance of hope and caution. The community's support was a fortress around me, but I remained vigilant. Fear tried to creep in during the quiet hours of the night, but I refused to let it win. This was my home, my sanctuary, and I would protect it. Daniel had taken a more active role in our campaign, organizing events and speaking publicly about the importance of elder rights. His transformation was nothing short of remarkable, a man who had once turned away now leading the charge alongside me. It was a balm to my wounded heart. But Anna's shadow still loomed. She had become quieter, her threats less overt, but her presence lingered like a dark cloud. Rumors continued to swirl, and I could feel her attempts to fracture the community's growing unity. One evening, after a long day at a support group meeting, I found a letter slipped under my door. The handwriting was familiar, crude and spiteful. Inside was a thinly veiled threat, warning me to cease my activism or face consequences worse than before. I stared at the note, the words burning into my skin. Fear flickered, but this time it was met with fierce determination. I would not be intimidated. I took the letter to the police and shared it with the community leaders. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Neighbors organized patrols, local businesses offered support, and the advocacy group mobilized resources to ensure my safety. The fear that once isolated me was being transformed into a collective shield. The next morning, I woke to find a surprise gathering in my front yard. Neighbors, friends, and supporters had come together to show solidarity. There were banners, homemade signs, and warm smiles that melted the cold of winter. Mrs. Collins approached me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Edith, you've brought us together. You've given us strength." Her words filled me with a deep sense of purpose. This was no longer just my fight, it was ours. But the path was not without setbacks. At the next community meeting, Anna's allies confronted us, accusing me of stirring trouble and dividing the neighborhood. The room grew tense, voices rising. I stood calmly, speaking from the heart. This is about dignity, respect, and justice for all of us. Silence has allowed cruelty to flourish. Together, we can create a safer, kinder community. Slowly, the room quieted. Some faces softened, others remained skeptical. Change was a slow dance, but the steps were being taken. Days later, Daniel and I sat by the fire, sharing quiet moments amidst the storm. He spoke of his regrets, his hopes, and the man he wanted to become. "I never want to see you hurt again, Mom," he said softly. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Tears welled in my eyes. Forgiveness was a journey, but with love and patience, it was possible. As the snow fell outside, blanketing the world in white, I felt a profound sense of peace. The scars of the past remained, but they no longer defined me. I was Edith, survivor, fighter, and beacon. And my story, our story, was still being written. The snow had finally begun to melt, and the first signs of spring timidly peeked through the frost, as if nature itself was reminding me that even the harshest winters eventually give way to renewal. I felt that same cautious hope stirring within me, a fragile but undeniable promise that life could begin anew, even after years of pain and struggle. The past months had been a whirlwind, a mix of triumphs and trials that tested every ounce of my strength. The neighborhood support continued to grow, and our campaign to raise awareness about elder abuse was gaining momentum beyond anything I'd dared to imagine. I found myself invited to speak at events, sharing not just my story but the voices of so many who had suffered in silence. Daniel had become my closest ally, not only helping organize our community efforts but working to mend the broken bonds in our family. His transformation was ongoing, sometimes fragile, sometimes resolute, but always moving forward. We were learning to communicate, to listen, and to heal. Yet, with growth came the inevitable shadows. Anna remained a presence in our lives, her bitterness simmering beneath a mask of forced civility. She had not given up, and though her overt threats had ceased, the undercurrents of manipulation and resentment lingered. One afternoon, as I was tending to my garden, something that had become both a refuge and a symbol of life's persistence, I received a phone call that jolted me from my thoughts. It was from a woman named Claire, a lawyer specializing in elder rights and advocacy. She had heard about our campaign and wanted to offer pro bono legal support to help protect me and others facing similar abuse. The conversation was a lifeline. Claire's expertise and passion added a new layer of strength to our movement. Together, we began exploring legal avenues to ensure that protections for elders were not just promises but enforceable realities. That evening, I shared the news with Daniel and a few close friends. The mood was hopeful yet cautious. We knew the road ahead was long, and legal battles could be draining and unpredictable. As spring deepened, so did our efforts. We organized workshops educating elders on their rights, how to recognize abuse, and where to seek help. The turnout was remarkable, filled with people whose stories echoed my own, painful but marked by resilience. One particularly moving moment came during a gathering when a man in his 70s stood and shared his experience of emotional neglect by his adult children. His voice trembled, but the room responded with empathy and encouragement. It was clear that we were creating a safe space for voices long silenced. Despite the progress, Anna's presence still cast a shadow. One evening, I discovered that some neighbors had been approached by her with offers of money or favors in exchange for withdrawing their support. It was a cruel reminder that fear and manipulation were powerful tools in the hands of those desperate to maintain control. Determined not to be divided, I convened a meeting with the community leaders and the advocacy group. We discussed strategies to protect our network, to strengthen bonds of trust, and to expose any attempts at coercion. Meanwhile, Daniel continued to wrestle with his past choices. One day, he surprised me by suggesting family counseling, hoping to rebuild not only our relationship but the fractured ties with Anna as well. The idea was daunting, but I agreed, recognizing that healing required confronting uncomfortable truths. Our first counseling session was difficult, filled with raw emotions and painful admissions. Anna remained defensive, but cracks began to show, moments where vulnerability peeked through her walls. I realized that beneath the cruelty and bitterness were fears and wounds just as deep as mine. It did not excuse her actions, but it helped me see her not just as an adversary but as a human being capable of change. Outside the sessions, life went on with its blend of small joys and ongoing challenges. The garden blossomed, children played in the park, and neighbors shared stories over fences and cups of tea. One morning, I found a note pinned to my door. It was from a young woman named Emily, a neighbor who had quietly joined our support group. She wrote about finding courage to confront her own family's abuse and thanked me for lighting the way. Tears blurred my vision as I folded the note. Moments like these reminded me why I had fought so hard, not for revenge, but for hope, healing, and the possibility of new beginnings. As spring stretched towards summer, I felt a sense of renewal, not just in nature, but within myself and my community. The scars of the past remained, but they were no longer chains. They were the roots from which strength and compassion grew. I was Edith, a survivor, a mother, a neighbor, a fighter, and my story was far from over. The warmth of early summer brought a gentle optimism to our neighborhood. Flowers bloomed with vibrant colors, and the days stretched long and golden, reminding me that life, despite its hardships, always found a way to flourish. I carried that thought with me like a talisman, a shield against the lingering shadows that sometimes threatened to pull me back into despair. Our community campaign was thriving. The workshops and meetings had become a regular part of life for many elders and their families, a place where stories could be told without fear and where support was tangible. I found myself in the role of mentor, guiding those who, like me, had once been silenced. It was a responsibility I accepted with humility and fierce determination. Daniel continued his journey of change, joining me not just in activism but in rebuilding our fractured family. The counseling sessions had unearthed painful memories and deep-seated resentments, but they also opened doors to understanding and forgiveness. Anna's participation remained tentative, but the walls she had built were slowly starting to crumble. One afternoon, as I was preparing for another speaking engagement at the local library, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Sarah, the young woman who had first reached out months ago, inspired by my story and eager to help. She arrived with a small group of volunteers, each bringing their own experiences and passion. Together, we began planning a neighborhood festival focused on elder respect and awareness. It was an ambitious project, a celebration of life, resilience, and community. The idea was to bring people together in joy and solidarity, turning the tide against abuse with the power of unity. The preparations were both exhilarating and exhausting. Flyers were printed, schedules arranged, and volunteers rallied. I found myself waking early, filled with a renewed sense of purpose. This festival was more than an event, it was a statement. But as the date approached, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Anna, feeling increasingly isolated, began a campaign of subtle sabotage. Supplies went missing, venues were double-booked, and whispers of doubt spread among some volunteers. I felt the weight of these challenges but refused to be deterred. With Daniel and Sarah's help, we tightened our plans, communicated openly with everyone involved, and focused on the bigger picture. The day of the festival arrived bright and clear, with the sun shining as if in blessing. The park was transformed into a vibrant space filled with colorful tents, music, and laughter. Elders shared stories, children played games, and neighbors connected in ways that felt deeply healing. I stood on the small stage, looking out over the crowd, feeling a swell of emotion. This was the culmination of months of struggle and triumph, a testament to resilience and hope. As I spoke, I shared not just my story but the collective journey of our community. I spoke of pain, betrayal, and the courage to fight back. I spoke of forgiveness and the power of coming together. The applause was thunderous, but it was the quiet moments afterward that touched me most, conversations with people who found strength in our shared experience, tears of relief and joy, and the forging of new friendships. But the festival's success did not quell the underlying tensions. Later that evening, I discovered that someone had vandalized one of the tents, spray painting hateful words aimed at me and our campaign. The community's reaction was immediate and fierce. Neighbors banded together to clean up, replacing the hateful words with messages of love and support. I realized then that the fight for dignity and respect was ongoing. There would always be shadows to confront, but together, we could keep pushing back. As I stood in the park under the fading light, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The journey from humiliation and silence to strength and community had been arduous, but it was a journey worth every step. I was Edith, no longer invisible, no longer silent. And I was ready for whatever came next. Summer's golden days stretched on, wrapping the neighborhood in warmth and light, but inside me, the battle between hope and lingering fear continued its quiet rhythm. Each morning, I reminded myself that the path I'd chosen, the fight for justice, for dignity, was one worth every sacrifice, even if shadows still lurked. The success of the festival had strengthened our community's resolve, but it also made us more visible targets. Anna's quiet sabotage had escalated. One afternoon, as I was returning from a meeting, I noticed tire tracks freshly pressed into my garden beds. Someone had driven a car over the flowers I'd painstakingly nurtured. The message was clear: intimidation. Instead of breaking me, it ignited a new fire. I took photos of the damage and shared them with the police and the neighborhood watch group. The community rallied once again, neighbors volunteering to help restore the garden, offering companionship and protection. In that collective spirit, I found strength. Daniel remained my closest ally. Our family counseling sessions grew deeper, peeling back layers of pain and misunderstanding. Anna participated reluctantly, her walls slowly softening, but the tension in our home was still palpable. One evening, after a particularly difficult session, Daniel confided in me, "Mom, I don't know how to fix everything, but I want to try." I smiled, touched by his honesty. That's all any of us can do, try. Work with the advocacy group also brought unexpected challenges and rewards. We had started drafting a proposal for stronger elder protection laws, hoping to present it to the local council. The process was slow and bureaucratic, but it gave me a sense of purpose beyond my personal story, a chance to create lasting change. One day, Claire, the lawyer helping us, informed me that the proposal had garnered significant support from several council members. It was a breakthrough, a beacon amid the struggle. Amidst these efforts, I found solace in small, everyday moments. Gardening, long walks in the park, and quiet evenings by the fire reminded me of life's simple joys. I cherished these moments, knowing they fueled my resilience. But the past was never far behind. One afternoon, a neighbor approached me with disturbing news. Anna had been spotted meeting with a man known for questionable activities. It was a reminder that her desperation might lead to more dangerous actions. I reported the information to the police, who assured me they would monitor the situation. The weight of uncertainty pressed down, but I refused to let fear dictate my life. Instead, I focused on the future, on the children playing in the park, the neighbors coming together, and the movement we had built from the ashes of pain. One evening, as Daniel and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of pink and gold, he turned to me and said, "Mom, you've changed not just our family but this whole community. I'm proud of you." Tears filled my eyes. The journey had been long and winding, filled with loss and healing, betrayal and forgiveness. But here, in this moment, surrounded by love and hope, I knew I had found my peace. I was Edith, a survivor, a fighter, and a voice. And I would never be silent again. The summer air hung thick and warm as the neighborhood continued to buzz with the life and energy of a community slowly healing together. Yet, beneath the surface, I knew that the wounds we carried were far from fully healed. The fight for respect, dignity, and justice had become a way of life, one that demanded constant vigilance, courage, and resilience. Our advocacy efforts were gaining traction. The proposal for stronger elder protection laws was nearing presentation to the local council, and I had been asked to speak at several town hall meetings. Each time, I stood before an audience filled with faces old and young, sharing stories, hopes, and a call to action. The power of voice, once stolen from me, had become my greatest weapon. Daniel was more involved than ever. His transformation was ongoing, a slow but steady process. Counseling had opened doors to understanding and forgiveness within our family. Anna, still a shadow in the background, had shown moments of vulnerability, though the bitterness in her eyes occasionally flared. The path to true healing would be long, but every small step forward was precious. One crisp morning, as I prepared for another speaking engagement, Daniel came to me with news. "Mom, the council meeting is set for next week. They want you to present the proposal." My heart pounded at the thought. The weight of years of struggle would be laid bare in that room. But this was what I had been fighting for, not just for myself, but for every elder silenced by neglect and abuse. The day of the meeting arrived, and the council chambers were filled to capacity. Friends, neighbors, and supporters sat side by side, a testament to the strength of our community. I stood at the podium, hands steady despite the pounding of my heart. I spoke of humiliation and betrayal, of the journey from silence to strength. I shared the evidence, the stories of those who had found courage through our campaign, and the urgent need for legal protections that would prevent others from suffering as I had. The room was silent as I finished, the weight of truth settling over the audience. Then, one by one, council members stood to speak, voices united in support. The proposal passed unanimously. Tears streamed down my face as I stepped down from the podium. This victory was more than a legal milestone, it was a triumph of resilience, courage, and community. That night, Daniel and I celebrated quietly. "You changed everything," he said softly. I smiled, knowing the journey was far from over but that together, we were unstoppable. The days that followed were filled with meetings, planning, and continued healing. Anna's presence remained a challenge, but her influence waned as the community rallied around justice. One evening, as I sat in my garden, watching the stars emerge, I felt a profound sense of peace. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer defined me. I was Edith, survivor, fighter, and a voice for the voiceless. And my story was still being written. The days following the council's unanimous decision to strengthen elder protection laws felt surreal, like a long, arduous winter finally giving way to the first warm rays of spring. The neighborhood seemed lighter, as if a collective breath had been released, and with it, a new sense of hope took root. But beneath the surface, I knew that true change was never immediate or easy. It was a gradual process, a weaving together of many lives, stories, and small victories. Daniel and I had become inseparable allies in this new chapter. Our conversations grew deeper and more honest, touching on pain, forgiveness, and the dreams of a future where family meant safety, respect, and love. Anna, though still a presence shadowed by bitterness, began to participate in family counseling more willingly. Her walls, once impenetrable, were beginning to show cracks, though old wounds and resentments remained. Our community efforts expanded beyond awareness and legal reform. We organized workshops on caregiving, mental health, and building intergenerational bonds. The support group blossomed into a beacon of hope for many. People who once suffered in silence now found a voice, a network, a family. One afternoon, as I was preparing materials for an upcoming seminar, a young woman named Claire arrived at my door. She was a volunteer from a nearby town who had heard my story through the advocacy network. Her eyes were bright with determination and kindness. "I want to help," she said simply. "Your fight has inspired me, and I want to bring this message to my community." I welcomed her warmly, grateful for the growing ripple effect our small movement was creating. Together, we began planning outreach programs that could reach even more elders and families. Yet, even in this time of growth and healing, shadows lingered. Anna's bitterness occasionally flared in quiet moments, sharp words exchanged behind closed doors, tension thickening the air. One evening, I overheard a conversation that chilled me. "She's turning everyone against us," Anna hissed to Daniel. "If we don't stop her, we'll lose everything." Daniel's reply was steady but conflicted. "I won't lose her again. But this has to end." I knew that confrontation was inevitable, not just with Anna, but with the lingering fears and pains within our family. One rainy evening, after a particularly tense day, Daniel and I sat by the fireplace. The room was filled with the soft crackle of flames and the scent of rain against the windows. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For everything. For the years I stayed silent, for the pain we all endured." Tears blurred my vision. Forgiveness was not a single moment but a journey, and I was ready to take each step. "I forgive you," I whispered. "Let's keep moving forward." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, a fragile peace settled between us. The movement we had built was growing stronger, reaching beyond our neighborhood and inspiring others to stand up. I found myself traveling to other towns, sharing our story, listening to the stories of others, and building a network united by resilience and hope. One day, I received a letter from a young man whose grandmother had been helped by our campaign. He wrote about the healing and safety she had found, and how our fight had given his family a second chance. I folded the letter carefully, feeling the weight and power of the ripple we had created. The path ahead was still uncertain, filled with challenges and moments of doubt. But I was no longer alone or invisible. I was Edith, a survivor, a fighter, and a voice for the voiceless. And I would keep speaking, fighting, and healing for as long as I was needed. The turning of seasons seemed to mirror the transformation taking place within me and the community I had come to cherish so deeply. With each passing day, I felt the heavy weight of the past lighten, not entirely gone, but lessened by the power of connection, courage, and unwavering determination. The journey from humiliation and neglect toward healing and respect had been long and fraught with pain, but it was a journey worth every sacrifice. The elder support group continued to flourish, with new faces appearing at every meeting, people who had once suffered in silence, now stepping forward with stories that broke the cycle of isolation. I often marveled at the resilience surrounding me, knowing that our shared voices had become a chorus too powerful to ignore. Daniel and I grew closer, finding solace in shared purpose and understanding. Our family counseling sessions, while still difficult, began to bear fruit. Anna's participation remained complicated, her bitterness like a shield she struggled to lower, but the cracks in her defenses were becoming wider, and moments of genuine remorse shone through. One chilly morning, as the sun struggled to break through the clouds, I received a call that shifted the course of our campaign dramatically. A local television station wanted to feature our community's fight against elder abuse in a primetime special. It was an incredible opportunity, and a daunting one. Preparing for the interview brought its own set of challenges. I spent hours recounting the darkest moments of my story, the humiliation of being called a burden, the fear and isolation, and the slow climb toward justice and healing. Speaking those truths aloud was both cathartic and exhausting. The day the special aired, neighbors gathered at the community center, watching intently as my story unfolded on the big screen. There were tears, nods of understanding, and an undeniable sense of solidarity. The response was overwhelming, with calls and messages flooding in from far beyond our town. The visibility brought renewed energy but also fresh challenges. Anna's allies, though diminished, mounted a last effort to discredit me and the campaign. Rumors and lies circulated, but the community had grown wise and vigilant. Our network of support was strong enough to withstand the storm. One evening, as I sat on my porch reflecting on the whirlwind of events, Daniel joined me with news that filled me with pride. The council is moving forward with funding for elder support programs, thanks in large part to your work, he said. This is just the beginning. I smiled, feeling a deep gratitude for the journey we had taken. From the park where I was humiliated to the halls of power where change was being made, the transformation was profound. Yet, I knew the fight was ongoing. Abuse and neglect were not problems solved overnight but battles fought every day by countless unseen heroes. Looking out at the stars twinkling in the clear night sky, I felt a profound sense of peace and purpose. I was Edith, a survivor, a fighter, and a beacon of hope. And I would keep fighting, speaking, and healing, for myself, for my family, and for all those whose voices were yet to be heard. The sun rose gently over the neighborhood, casting a warm glow on streets that had once witnessed my deepest humiliation but now echoed with hope and resilience. As I stood by my garden, the blossoms bursting with vibrant colors, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for the journey I had traveled but for the community that had grown stronger alongside me. From the moment Anna called me a slowpoke in the park and dragged me aside like I was nothing, to this very day where my voice echoed in council chambers, community halls, and even television screens, the path had been long and filled with pain. But it was also a testament to the unbreakable spirit that lives in all of us, no matter our age or circumstance. Daniel stood beside me, a steady presence, his hand warm in mine. The scars within our family were still healing, but the cracks were filled with forgiveness, understanding, and hope. Anna, too, was part of this fragile new beginning, working through her own journey of change and redemption. Our campaign had blossomed into a movement, a network of voices rising up against elder abuse, bringing light to dark places, and offering strength to those who had been silenced. We had helped pass laws that offered real protection, created support groups that nurtured healing, and inspired countless others to stand up. But beyond the legal victories and community programs, what mattered most was the reclaiming of dignity, mine, Daniel's, and the many elders who had suffered in silence. As I look back, I see not just the pain but the power born from that pain. The humiliation that once crushed me was transformed into courage. The loneliness into connection. The fear into hope. To everyone listening to my story, I want you to know this: you are not alone. No matter how heavy the silence, how deep the wounds, there is always a way forward. There is strength in speaking out, in standing tall, and in coming together. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel so we can continue to bring light to stories that need to be heard. And before I go, I want to ask, where are you from? I would love to hear your story, your voice, because every story matters. Remember, even the smallest ember can ignite a powerful fire. Keep your light burning bright.